or good afternoon. All right, got it. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. Sylvain, certainly from your perspective, good evening, and I hope you're looking forward to a good seminar and then a nice dinner afterwards. But for those people who are coming in from different parts of the country, I would wish you just bienvenue. Thank you so much for joining us. I also want to thank everybody for indulging us, if you will, in our need to reschedule. We realize your time is extremely valuable and appreciate your consideration as we needed to change the date and adjust accordingly. If nothing else, it benefits the wines having a little bit of extra time in bottle to decontract and relax a little bit, and gave you a little bit more time for planning. So it's great to have you here. We'll give everybody a minute or two to jump in, but for those of you who are Zoomland veterans, please do let us know where you're coming in from today, where you're zooming in from today, and say hi through chat. We'll talk about Q&A a little bit later, but here in San Francisco, where I am today, the sun is peaked out, but it is definitely cold. And the fall is really kicked in. We're actually hoping for rain next week for the first time in a long time, as we went from an atmospheric river and being all excited to back into sort of, oh my God, it's not raining again. But hopefully that will be better and we'll have a more typical fall. Sylvain, how is the weather where you are?
Well, today was a really regular day that we could have in winter here in Luberon, which means blue sky, windy with a little bit of mistral, and pretty cold all day long. This morning we had a frozen temperature, so I think we were -3 in degrees Celsius, and this evening we were not far from 12 to 13 degrees. So typical day here, pretty dry, windy, and with a very big difference of temperature between night and day.
Yes, the proverbial thermal amplitude, which we will talk about as we get deeper into our presentation. So once again, I hope weather is good where you are, where you're zooming in from, and we're looking forward to a lovely seminar. So I'm going to give about another 30 seconds, and then we're going to jump right in. But I think you're going to find today's session to be really engaging. Not only are we blessed to have Sylvain with us, and I will give Sylvain a bit of a formal introduction as we go into the program, but comparatively to some of the other areas that we spent time on together as a smaller group here today, as a larger group in some of our other sessions, Luberon has not really been an area that we've been focusing on. And I think that by the time you learn about it and taste the wines, you'll be as excited as I was, as I learned more. You know, I look at this area a bit like one of those Russian nesting dolls. The more layers you pull off, the more you realize there is inside, and so much to learn and so much to see. So on that lovely note, we will do a little housekeeping. We will get started and we will talk. So here we go. Immersive Luberon, bienvenue, and let's go. So again, a lot of people will be watching this after the fact, so I want to do it right and give them ample time. So I thought we would actually start with a collage. And this is sort of a connection of the dots here, because this is an area, like I said, that is a journey. It's a discovery for everybody. But I think these 6 images, if you will help provide a little background and place there. So first of all, Luberon is not new. Luberon, like so many parts of Europe, is a very old area with great history. And the paintings that you see there, the vineyard shot from our friend Vincent van Gogh, and the house shot there from Cézanne, 2 wonderful impressionists of France that we know, really capture and I think allude in a wonderfully compelling way the beauty that is this part of the world. It is just a special and spectacularly gorgeous spot there. I think for people who were not necessarily, and I hope a couple of you are art people, I recognize that photo, that painting, I recognize that painting. You might recognize the book on the far left. And I think Luberon probably got its biggest aha moment of late, if you will, when Peter Mayle wrote this now timeless novel, Year in Provence, which had several sequels after it. But of course, the first book is always the best. And he wrote that book in 1989. And for a lot of us who first became exposed to Provence and to this sort of beautiful part of southern France, it was through a lot of the beautiful literary pictures and the stories and the anecdotes that Peter Mayle in 1989 created and built excitement. And built excitement not only around the lifestyle, but of course around the wines too. And in doing so, you know, there was an attraction to this area, and a lot of people moved into the Luberon who hadn't been there before, who perhaps only vacationed before. And some of them, of course, are quite noteworthy and not only moved because of its beauty and having a wonderful pied-à-terre away from where they lived, but also because they were truly lovers of wine and they realized the potential of this beautiful area to make great wines. And we can see up in the upper right-hand corner, our friend John Malkovich, who's L'Équelle du Lacoste, is now a multi-year, multi-vintaged property, making some delightful wines. Maybe not as quirky as John, but delightful and delicious. And then down in the lower sort of middle there, you have Ridley Scott, whose Masté Infirmière wines have gotten wonderful accolades over time, almost as much as his movies have too. So just was just a little connection of the dots here, and maybe to get yourself thinking a little bit as we approach this area. So before we jump off, just a little bit of housekeeping. Zoomlandia norms, as you know them. If you are going to chat, use chat for chatting, and use Q&A specifically for the questions. Several folks are behind the scenes, namely Li Meng Stro on our team here at Full Circle and Master of the World, and Daphne Payan from Interron is in the background. Eileen perhaps as well too. Andrea on our team as well, and they'll sort of manage a lot of that activity. We will have a dedicated Q&A period at the end, although questions will be answered in the Q&A thing if you put them in there. But to the extent that they're a question that is probably worth bringing up in a more public forum, we will probably repeat it a little bit later. Please make sure that you select everyone to chat comments, because if not, the default is only to Sylvain, myself, and since we're talking, we may not be as chatty with all of you as we would like to be otherwise. For many of you who are familiar with the benefit that we get of being able to conflate our seminars with our Master of the World kits, a couple of pieces of advisement. Number one, obviously, if you have not opened your wines and poured them out already, please do so. In a perfect world, you have 6 glasses in front of you and you can pour all 6 wines out at the same time. If you were wine trapped in a little 187 milliliter bottle too, you would welcome oxygen. Oxygen is your friend to release the beautiful aromas and perfumes that the glasses will have. And you should also, as you're engaging the wine in the air, in the glass, etc., please feel free to try your glasses as you want. I know people are very polite in waiting for us to talk about the wines, but you should feel free to enjoy the wines. The wines add texture, they add context to what they're talking about when we speak of varieties and regions and soils and things like that. But do know that we will cover the wines individually. So we will address the wines in sets, your whites 1 and 2, the rosés 3 and 4, and then the reds ultimately 5 and 6. For those of you who are veterans and want to do it, go for it. For those of you who are new to the format, this is a Master of the World kit, 244C to be specific, and per the green sheet that came in the tasting mat that came there. If you wanted to either today or afterwards engage by registering the kit and going in, you'll see more information about the wines and wineries. You'll see how they grid it out when my Master Sommelier companions and myself did that, and you can actually blind taste as you want. To that point, you can blind taste this if you want to. Obviously, the wines are all sleeved, but if you are saying, hey, Evan, it's too late in the year, I'm worried about the holidays and everything else, I don't want to blind taste, you are welcome to reveal, peel to reveal, pull the sleeves off the bottles, know what the wines are, etc., and go for that. But obviously, we will be revealing the wines as we taste them along the way. So with that said, we're going to now kind of get going here and emerge into this. And I'd like to introduce my friend Sylvain Moret. Sylvain is one of the nicest gentlemen I've had the pleasure of meeting over the last few months, and is an absolute advocate and protagonist of the region. He knows the region well. He's been there for now over 20 years, is my understanding. He comes from Burgundy, and I think that will actually be apparent a little bit when we try his wine. There's almost a DNA Burgundian sensibility about his approach towards his wine, but he's also very smart, very articulate, very charming, very thoughtful, and knows more about Luberon than I will ever know, no matter how hard I study, and is also really the de facto lead of the appellation itself. So welcome, Sylvain. And we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to talk about this first slide, and then I'm going to turn it over a little bit to Sylvain. So it goes without saying that the Luberon is a very unique spot. I mean, not only do you have very few regions that are covered, if you will, by an incredible novelist, wonderful impressionist painters, and have their fair share of celebrities making delicious wines, but as you're going to learn later on, the area has these sort of very nuanced intricacies about them that make it different than other places. The first of all is that all the wines here are blends. In order to be carrying the Luberon appellation on the label, they must be blended wines. Varietal wines as AOC wines by law are not allowed, which is sort of an interesting concept when you think of, yes, wines are there. And there's not to say, and so we'll talk to us a little bit later, that there aren't people who are making individual variety wines. They're just IGPs. They're not appellation or AOC, AOP wines. The vineyards themselves are actually all located, this is such a trip, within the confines of the Regional National Reserve, a park that is there with actual, confines of a park, and within the proximity of Mount Luberon itself, from which the appellation, of course, takes its name. All of the wines come from some level of altitude, which again, as you move down into the south and into Provence and into the southern Rhone Valley, we know that not all of the wines are coming from altitude. And here you can see that the bulk of the wines are going to be somewhere between about 700 and about 1,650 feet above sea level. And what's interesting here is that even though you might have some cooperatives, which are critical, you have a lot of small farmers. The small farmers, by definition, make the cooperatives critical because since they aren't necessarily making their own wine, they have to have the wines bottled and vinified by somebody else. But this is a wonderful area where you have this incredible mix of older and younger, smaller producers and farmers, incredible biodiversity by virtue of the fact that you're in a natural reserve that is not only grapes, but obviously the biodiversity of the reserve itself, and in just an incredible location. So you can see a lovely representative photo up there. But let's go ahead and situate ourselves. And Sylvain, why don't you take us through the next slide and give us a sense of where we are and why that's poignant in the context of these two maps.
Thanks, Ivan, and good evening to everyone. Welcome to Luberon. As you can see, we are just in the southern part of the Rhone Valley. When you take the Rhone Valley, it goes from Lyon just south to Luberon, and by that specific situation, it's an interesting place just because we are really kind of a link between what we call the regular Rhone Valley and the Provence terroir, which will begin just a little bit south from Luberon. For this, we have specific things which are a diversity of minding. We have a diversity of wine producing too, just because we make a lot of white wines in that place. We make, of course, a lot of rosé wine too, just because we are really not far from Provence. So this is very specific for Rhone Valley. It's just there's no other place over there where you can find at least 50% of rosé wine produced and 20 to 25% of white wine. So this is not just about red, which is the color of the regular color of Rhone Valley. Normally, it's just about a blending of several type of wine, several type of terroir, and several type of definition of wine. So as you can see, if you just stay here, you will be, for people who just came there, we are exactly in the middle of, if you take the road from Avignon to Marseille, we are just in the middle of this. So something like 35 to 40 kilometers from Mediterranean Sea, and also 50 kilometers from Mont Ventoux. So which means that we are just in the middle from 0 meters high to 2,000 meters high, you know, so we are in the middle. So it's 1,125 meters high over there.
There you go. Like, excuse me for pushing the slide too happy. I think if you want to talk to us a little bit about this snapshot here of Luberon, I think in 3 bullets really does a lot to express the personality of the area. So please.
So as you can see on this, first thing I was trying to begin to talk about this to you, it's just about altitude. Very often, some of you just went to the webinar of Costières de Nîmes. So Costières de Nîmes and Luberon are just brothers, but just the very, very different brothers. Over there, we are just about altitude. So we love to say that we are kind of mountain vineyards, because it's pretty hard to understand that the average vineyard in Luberon will be around 350 meters. I'm sorry, I don't know how to count in feet, but maybe Evan can do the transposition. But this means that, for example, Châteauneuf-du-Pape is 100 meters high. So this is just very different. The consequence of this is just like we are very south on a map. You know, we are not far from the sea. We are 1 hour southern than Avignon or Châteauneuf-du-Pape. But because we are higher in altitude, we are much harder to go to regular maturation of the grapes, and we've got a great freshness in all wines produced over there in the 3 colors. Second thing is that we've got altitude, but we also have a lot of sun. It's very, very sunny over there. As you can see, it's some of the sunniest place in France. Coming from a guy like me, a Burgundian guy, I can say that I always say to my friends that when they ask me, why don't you come back more often to Burgundy? I say, just because when you will turn the light on, I will be back. But now I know that something else exists. I can't just stay over there. You know, it's just about blue sky, sunny sky, and a great light, which has always been one of the secrets of the Provence area. And we are just in the middle of this. So the sun is there too, altitude is there. And it's really what makes us very interesting place, just because we have a lot of different culture over there, agriculture things. You know, we can do vegetables here. We make a lot of fruits. We also make a lot of olive trees. We have lavenders. We have a big forest. We have a little bit of vineyards, but everything is just kind of a puzzle. It's not a complete area with vineyards. We still have a very, very big biodiversity and old grape varieties, old vineyards, which means that it's a little jewel in the middle of the Provence. And that's interesting to know that we still have a lot to do there, but we can be very confident about what the nature gave us to do this.
Yeah. No, the stress of the biodiversity, not only across different crops, but not being a monoculture driven by grapes as other areas are, is important. And again, you brought it up quickly, but I think it's worth reiterating that the amount of vineyard in this gargantuan preserve is just a small amount, so that the actual biodiversity of other flora as well as fauna in the area is important. And I think it is worth bringing up and hitting on this climate thing that you brought up, because the altitude is so critical to the area. I mean, it really is as much an alpine climate or an alpine influenced climate as it is anything else. And you brought up Avignon and Châteauneuf-du-Pape. I mean, if they have over the typical thermal amplitude, something around 10.7 degrees, typically between, again, the coolest and the warmest moments of the day by virtue of Celsius. In Luberon, you're talking 14.5 or 15. So literally 50% more range within their thermal amplitude than you would have down, say, in Châteauneuf-du-Pape, Avignon, that area there. And that is hypercritical to the personality of the wines, to the length of the growing season, to the quality of the growing season.
And we just 1 hour of driving from Avignon or Châteauneuf, you know, so it means that it's spectacularly different in a very small part of kilometers. You know, it goes very quickly. Just because we've got the altitude, and as you may see after this, we also have 2 rivers coming from the Alps, going through the vineyards and coming back with fresh air, which is really, we've got a strange microclimate over there, which was pretty strange in the beginning, because 25 years ago, it was just like we were talking about Haute Côte du Rhône, you know, just like you are talking about Haute Côte de Beaune, Haute Côte de Nuit. It was the same, you know. Grapes looks like they could never go to a complete maturation at this time. But now with global climate changing, things are getting different for us. Yeah, we are ready to achieve all this. So it's a pretty good time for us.
I think you're right. I mean, one of the strategies that we've certainly been reading about here in addressing climate change is moving to higher altitude. So to your point, you know, whether you are considered the old Haute Côte de Rhône, if you will, or in the case of Burgundy, Haute Côte de Nuit, people are revisiting these areas as being well positioned for climate change. So a point well taken. So let's take a look at the facts. Sylvain alluded to this a little bit, but it's not a, you know, it's for as big as we talk about it, for much as you seem, it's not huge. I mean, there's 64 producers that make up this area. As I said before, co-ops are a very important part of the complexion of this area, because there are so many small farmers, and there are indeed 10 co-ops, and there is one union. In fact, Sylvain, because I couldn't find anything. Can you explain to us what a union is and how a union would be different than a co-op?
Yeah, so we've got over there, we have to know, just like Ivan said in the beginning, we've got a lot of very small farmers. And from the beginning of the 20s, so 1 century ago, a lot of places in France just decided to make what we call cooperative, so which is having a common tool to everyone just to be able to produce wine. Like this, a lot of people say, okay, I'm just a grape producer, so how could I go a little bit better? So they say, okay, let's first make cave cooperative, and after this, they had wine to sell. And the thing is that they needed customers, and first customer they had said, okay, I take the wine, but I take this price. And the second one said the same thing. And after a moment, they say, okay, maybe we should be able to just try to sell this wine a little bit better. So they say, okay, we are 10 big cave cooperative. All together, we make a very big amount of wine. So what we are trying to do is that we are making a union of these 10 cave cooperative. And this one will be the pilot of everything we'll produce over there. So first part of the story was in the 70s, I think. They just created this. So they became Union de Cave Coopérative. So it seems 10 cave cooperative making a new tool just to be able to go to the market with their own brand and everything. But second thing was that the first problem they just had at this moment, so maybe 20 years ago, was first version was that people just made wine the way they wanted it to do and say, okay, now you take it and you try to sell this. And the guy said, okay, we have a problem because this guy makes that type of wine, this guy makes that type of wine. You made, for example, 30% of rosé this year, but we just need 20%. So we need someone to have a big reflection of this. So that was a second revolution on this. So the union just became a negotiant right now. So now it's much easier for him to say, okay, I'm your customer, but this is the kind of wine I want you to produce. So I want you to make a lot of efforts on many things. First thing that I want you to be able to make a great selection on all your vineyards and say, okay, this part of the vineyard is very great for red. This one is for white. This one is for rosé. After this, I want you to produce that kind of rosé. You know, we are not far from Provence, so I would like to have light in color, pale rosé, pretty fresh. So I need you to use for this much more Grenache and Cinsault than Syrah. Then you keep the Syrah for the thing and everything. So all the policy was just dictated with this, which is very interesting because we've got a, you'll see when we'll taste the wine of the Union of Marronneau, you have a real policy about condition of production, type of production, quality of wine, and adaptation to markets. And what is very, very great is that it's having a lot of very good consequence on everything. And all around this, you've got just 64, 65 producers, including, as you say, Ridley Scott, for example, or that kind of guy. And it's interesting too, just because, as I told you, it's just a puzzle. So the vineyards are not so big, you know. It's 8,000 AC, so it's not so big. Acres, but it's not so big. But the thing is that the territory is very, very large. So you can have very small spot of different grapes, varieties, and altitude, place, and terroir and everything, which means that you can have a real large panel of wine produced in the appellation.
There you go. Well, gosh, who knew when I asked you if you could explain what a union was that we would get such a rich answer. But it's interesting that the union actually, to your point, acts almost like a negociant, working with the vineyards and all that to make sure that the balance of wines, the style of wines, what's going on in the market, that's a very unique approach. I don't think I've heard that from any of the regions. So there you go. As Sylvain alluded to earlier, the area is known primarily for rosé. We'll talk about that more specifically when we taste our rosés. 28% red and 20% white. So not necessarily the complexion that you would expect necessarily being where we are. Even though the area itself is large, the amount of vineyard acreage is just over 8,000 acres, not aces. Sorry, that's my typo there. And increasingly more and more organically grown. So 19% currently, but definitely on the rise, as I was learning, as we'll talk about more. It's an area where they not only make their wine, but they love their wine. So not as much exported as perhaps we would think or like. 27% exported, of which 8% of that goes to the United States. So as I mentioned earlier, we're now going to start tasting the wines in pairs. So we're going to focus on wines 1 and 2. And as you go through those and begin tasting them, and I want to applaud Sylvain and Daphne for providing us 6 wines that as pairs are very distinctively different. So the differences clearly between 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6 really do a wonderful job of illustrating diversity and range. But white wines are obviously a part of what goes on here. And once again, a reminder that all wines are blends, but also a reminder that each different grape is going to bring something different there. So in this case, you've got your blends of these grapes that you know of and hear of well. But I think it's important to understand what each grape brings to the party. So Claret really is all about freshness, as we know. Doesn't necessarily have the acidity here as you might find in other places, but it brings forward a lot of tree fruits, some fennels, some apples, blossoms, and things like that. Very important player. The Vermintino grape, which we know of as Rol over in Corsica, as Favorita in Piemonte, and of course as Vermentino in Sardinia, is a very important grape here and adds a little bit of color, but also adds texture, gras, as they would say, or a fatness to it, and wonderful fresh herbal characters, a lot of floral elements to it, and some stone fruit, namely like apricots and peaches, a little bit of citrus, grapefruit, stuff like that. Bourboulon specifically is about flowers and about citrus. Roussanne, as we know from our friends down further to the west, is one of the more noble grapes of the area, and not only gives richness in color, but it brings forward, again, a lot of stone fruit flavors, and then some other interesting notes that bring forth florals like narcissus. You get honeysuckle. You even can find honey in the wines themselves. Marsanne is, again, really a textural thing. It brings forward a little bit of fruit character, but it's really all about texture and richness. Ugni Blanc, or our favorite friend Trebbiano in Italy, is really about structure. It's really about providing acid, backbone, nerve, and, if you will, vein to the wine. And Viognier, well, it's Viognier, right? It's perfume. It's honeysuckle. It's peaches. It's all sorts of stuff like that. Mineral notes and all that there. So once again, this sort of palette, to pick up on Saison, Van Gogh, of color that you have by virtue of different varieties adds a lot there. And Viognier and Roussanne are more typically supplementary grapes, whereas the others drive the blend. So the first wine we have, oops, there we go, is from Domaine Le Novi. This is their Terre des Safres 2020. As you can see, it's a blend of Bourboulon, Vermentino, Grenache Blanc, and Uni Blanc, as such, very typical. Where possible, we've gotten their agricultural practices there, and you're going to see this recurring theme again that we saw in Nîmes, that we see throughout southern France these days, where the conditions agriculturally allow you to practice bio or organics and sustainability, biodynamics and things like that. So we'll pop it up there, and these people are biologique certified. Pretty much straightforward on the vinification. Direct press, there is some skin contact there, which I'm sure you can see reflected in the darker color, because the vintages of 1 and 2 are the same, but it's just a lovely wine. I think this gentleman and Sylvain can talk to us more about Romain in a minute, but when I was tasting this wine, I tasted through these earlier and just made some notes. What I love about this is a very bright, fresh, it's pears, it's yellow apples, it's green melon, it's Asian pear, it's cooked quince. There's almost a sort of herbal and soft minty, and what I call kind of like a pepsin character, pepsin being that flavor of gum you can remember that's somewhere between spearmint and juicy fruit that comes out in this wine. It's floral, it's honeysuckled, apple blossomed, minerals and stones, a little bit of chamomile. And just a bit of lees, that sort of bit of Nilla wafer and brioche dough that you get there. It's there very much as I would call it sort of un vin flatteur. I mean, it's very forward, very approachable now, and creamy, bright, and obviously we're reflecting not only a good selection of fruit, but a very talented winemaker as well. So Sylvain, your thoughts on the wine, and you obviously know Romain.
Yeah. What is very interesting with this wine first, before talking about Romain, is just like when you see the blending, it's very, very interesting, because Romain is the first guy coming back over there now who really works with a very rare grape varieties, which name is Bourboulon, as you said, which is a typical grape from this place, really finding in Vaucluse only, but specifically in Luberon, which has pretty disappeared the last 25 years, just because it was not ripe enough. And it came with a lot of acidity and a lot of bitterness. So now we are just trying to come back with this grape variety, because it's very, very interesting. It's an interesting wine just when you go to assemblage. What is very interesting too is that you've got Vermintino, Grenache Blanc, Uni Blanc, Bourboulon, 4 grape varieties, making a very good frame of what Luberon white can really be right now. So Romain is a very, very talented young winemaker. You know, he just came back maybe 5 or 6 years ago. Right now, he made a very good education by working in different places in France, and something which is very, very interesting, that not just about production, but also about marketing and selling too. So he's very, very ambitious on this, and he makes a very, very great work in the vineyard. You know, his father just before him just prepared everything during many years. So sometimes he came to me and say, you know, all the work I'm doing, hopefully Romain will be back and will be able to do something all together. And Romain took his time. He went a lot in Languedoc-Roussillon, for example, and Spain also. And then when he came back, he had great ideas, a great way to go through this, and he just decided to really make organic agriculture 100% with a lot of engagement, you know, including coming back with a new bees houses, you know, bees houses in the middle of the vineyards, trying to use a lot of new seeds in the middle of the vineyard ranks, you know, just to have what we now call green fertilizers, you know, just trying to farm a lot of everything, and increasing his range of different grape varieties and of range of wine too. So Terre de Safre is the first wine of the domain. It's as you said, it's an easy one, but it's a very, very great picture of what we can obtain here with a good blend, with a very good work on the grapes, with trying to obtain ripe grapes with pretty long aging, you know. So when everything is in that order, you can obtain that kind of wine, which is pretty rare in the Rhone Valley. And we were talking about a link between Rhone Valley and Provence, you know. Here, it's a little bit like this, you know, you have a Vermintino, they call it roll, that you can really find in Provence, but you add other type of grape, Grenache Blanc, Bourboulenc, and it goes to another type of balance. And in that case, very often I like to say when we are talking about cousinage, you know, I don't know how you could say this, but what we could look like, I would say that we look like much more like Italy than Provence or Rhone, for example, because the landscape looks like a little bit like Tuscany or that kind of place, or even north part of Italy. But we also have a lot of diversity, which is not the case in many places, you know. And we have a lot of grape varieties, and all that things put together makes me think much more about Italian way of winemaking than Provence or Rhone Valley winemaking, for example.
I think it's interesting too that you brought out, you know, and this is such a wonderful wine to kick off with because it speaks so much to the quality, the different grape varieties, the grapes that are the sort of portfolio pastiche of which you get there locally. But also Romain's well traveled. You mentioned that he worked in Spain. He worked specifically at Clos Magador. He worked with the Catenas down in Argentina. So he brings this wonderful outside perspective in, yet with this incredibly firm commitment to the region itself, which is just wonderful. And obviously he's well respected as you're speaking to him does, as well as his own resume and the quality of his wine. So wine number two,
also known as you know, as we said, Hecke, young Luberon, young Robert De Niro from the Luberon. You know, when you go to just try to find a picture of Romain, and you'll see that he looks like Bob De Niro when he was young. You know, in Taxi Driver.
Taxi Driver, yeah.
Yeah, so just come to visit him, and you'll see that you will be very surprised.
Hopefully, we'll be able to do that soon. So let's go ahead and next move on to our next wine here, which is from Marranon. And I know you want to speak with this because this is in fact our union, I believe, that we were speaking about earlier. So this wine is their Grand Marranon 2019. So I take it back. I said it was the same vintage. It's obviously a little bit older, but it's also a blend of Grenache Vermentino, but here with the tip of the Beret to Roussanne, it's completely a field blended wine. It has barrels on it, of which 30% of them are new, but I would suggest to you that they're really well integrated on tasting this wine. It spent time 6 months there, 60% goes in the tank, and it's on its lees for 6 months. So what's interesting here is you get another side. So for me, where the first wine was very more flatteur and fruit forward, if you will. This wine is definitely more on the savory side. It really shows a little bit more vein and verve. And whereas the first wine was more about tree fruit and stone fruit, this one's really more about citrus. You pick up ripe citrus. I picked up notes of marmalade, which give me more of that sort of rind and zest element to it, a little bit of lemon curd, sharper and more tart in its structure and its fruit profile there. And a little bit of tropical, you know, maybe some star fruit there, maybe a little bit of kiwi. And the lees stirring here is where you really pick up the texture and the weight. They're wonderful, interesting elements, I thought, of herbs. There's laurel, there's verbena, there's a little bit of lemongrass there, and then sort of a very soft salinity and minerality, which I think is more pronounced in this wine than it was in their in the first wine. Very attractive, much more of a food wine, I think, a vin gastronomique than the first wine, which I could see drinking all day as I watch the clouds go by. This wine definitely demands food. And the Marranon has an interesting story. And Philippe Tolleré is obviously a very gifted winemaker, sort of overseeing what they're doing there. They're leaders, not only in terms of volume, which we'll hear about, but on the environment and on technical certification, and a lovely story. So please share with us a little bit more about Marranon, Sylvain.
So Marranon is exactly what I was explaining you about the union. First was they called it Cellier de Marranon, and when it became a negociant, just like I told you before, they became Marranon. So first thing to know is that people, young winemakers that goes to Marranon, so to Cave Cooperative, then goes to Marranon, just own 80% of all the vineyards that you can find in Luberon. So of course, when you own so much vineyards, you also own some of the best vineyards. And all the great policy of Marranon on his Grand Cuvée, just like Grand Marranon, Blanc, Rouge, or Rosé, is just to trying to find the best places for each grape varieties and say, okay, we are not going to produce huge volumes on this, but we want it to be really the premium wine of the domains of the négoce. So let's try to find the best definition about this. So they decided to make a wine which is also possible to do in Luberon. That's interesting. You can have fresh wine. You can have three big type of white wines for me. First are very, very light and fruity white wines that will be bottled just like rosé, sometimes a little bit before, so after 5-6 months with a little bit of gas and a lot of freshness, but easy aromas for aperitif, for example, or that kind of stuff. Then you have the average one, just like you have Terre de Save before, which are wines with a longer aging, but no wood aging, just like about trying to make a better integration of everything during a longer aging. These are very, very interesting wines that you can find in Luberon. And after this, you have another level of wine, which we could call them aging wine or barrel aging wine. But the best representatives of that family for me are the wines that went to barrels without having a oak sensation or a barrel tasting sensation. There's something which is very important to know about white wines in Rhône Valley and in Luberon, of course. You know, I came from Burgundy, as Ivan said in the beginning, so I'm pretty used to drink very pretty acidic wine, you know, coming from Chardonnay or from Chenin or from Riesling or that kind of stuff. And I like that kind of sensation with freshness coming from acidity, tartric acid, malic acid, but very often tartric acid. Here, even if you've got freshness, if you've got altitude and everything, you will always have a lower quantity of acidity. You know, pH will be a little bit higher. You have a little bit less acidity, total acidity. So you need to find something different just to have a good balance on what I call the triangle of sensation. You've got sugarness, you've got acidity, and the third one, which is very important with our type of grape varieties, is bitterness. And what is interesting is that the grape variety we normally use making wine in white wines in Rhône Valley are pretty important with bitterness. For example, Vermintino will be like this, Roussanne will be like this. So because you can't really up your acidity, you know, naturally, you will try to have a little bit more bitterness, but you need to have a very, very delicate bitterness. And one way of making this is using some type of grapes. But the other thing is that you can also do something interesting, which is using barrel aging, not for coming with sweetness or oak tasting or that kind of stuff, but just coming to add a little bit of tannins, you know, and this little tannins will complete your bitterness and make a better balance on this. And this is exactly what they are trying to do on this one.
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually noted, I didn't read it off of my notes earlier, but the wine is slightly phenolic compared to the first wine,
Yeah.
which is there. This wine definitely has some very soft phenols that bring just a slightly bitter edge to the finish, and I think at complexity of the wine. So I'm glad that I found that too. But I think that's an interesting point that you bring up, and one that I believe will probably play forward for us as we all continue to learn about wine. So now that we've got a little bit of flavor on white wines, let's switch gears here and talk about a little bit about the history of the area, because it's got a very rich history here. And we'll take a very brief thing here, but maybe you could walk us a little bit through the importance of the historical relevance of this area. Please.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
So
yeah, no problem.
yeah, this is we have a very old tradition of making wine here in Luberon, but also, which is very interesting, we have a very old tradition of making wine, but we also have a very young tradition of making wine. It just looks like we lost a big part of this. It was much more like Luberon was much more like an orchard for centuries. You know, you could find grapes, but very often was table grapes, you know, just like Muscat, you know, grapes that you can eat like this. You had a little bit of wines, but it was not really a real wine area, just like you can have in Hermitage, for example, or in that kind of places where you can find a big winemaking tradition for two millenaries. You know, here you always had wine. It was always part of the culture, but just like we could say, just like the natural Provencal wine culture, which has always been there, but which has always been something different from big areas, just like Bordeaux or Burgundy, for example. It was part of a agriculture way of living. Actually, it was just like you were making seeds, you were making pork, you were making sheep, you were making anything, and you were making a little bit of wine, but you were not dominated by wine history and winemaking. And this began to change, I think, 1 century ago. So first part is very interesting, but this is just to say that we, of course, had wine here for many, many years. But the real genesis of this was, for me, in the 1920, 1930, where people just say, okay, now we are going to make wine because French need wines. At this time, you know, we were drinking, in France, we were drinking something like 150 liters of wine per people every year. So we needed a lot of wine. So everywhere you were able to have a wine after the phylloxera problems, you know, you just decided to make it professionally, I would say. So first thing was to say, this is why we have cave cooperative in that part of France, just because all these guys knew how to make wine for their own consumption or for very little dealing, but they were not able to make wine for big places. We don't have a big dukes or big count or something like this saying, okay, I just own all this place and you are going to make wine just like in Châteauneuf-du-Pape for all the royaume in that place. No, over there was not like this. So because French needed wine, they just decided to replant a lot of vineyards. And they decided to create cave cooperative. So 1929, 1930, 1931, beginning of the big history about this. Then we had about 40 years like this with small producers going to cave cooperative, and that's it. And the beginning of the 70s, new guys came and say, okay, I want to do my own wines, but on a small scale. I want to do just like everywhere else. I want to be my own boss. I want to be my own entrepreneur, and I make my own domain. So this is the beginning of the 62 little domain that you have now. First place, 70, 80 to the 90s. We had small guys from here saying, okay, now I think I'm able to make my own wine, so let's try it. And you had people coming from other areas or other place in France coming and making tries, you know, say, okay, let's try to do something. Then we went to the appellation d'origine contrôlée. AOC, 1988. Then new guys came here, you know, with a lot of money, for example, and say, okay, let's buy large because we've got a lot of place. You can have wonderful houses over there. You can have great condition to make wine. So now we are going to make wines with a real policy of marketing and everything. And this was the second time. And third time came from 2010, for example, to now is you've got that kind of guy, just like Ridley Scott, or just like all these celebrities or big investors coming in one part of the appellation and making very, very interesting wine and something which is very great for our appellation. And you've got very, very small entities, 2, 3, 4 hectares, making natural wine with horses and everything. And all this just stay in the same place, which is very, very interesting. We are in a very interesting time right now in Luberon.
Yeah. Very, very interesting. And what you can see from that final point there, and as Sylvain mentioned, the Luberon got its AOC status in 88, which meant that the first wines coming out in 89 were the first wines on the appellation. And that happens to be, if you remember slide 1, the year that Peter Mayle came out with his novel 2. So 88, 89, a very important period for the Luberon. So let's move on now to our rosés. And rosés, as you can see, then again, over 50% of the production. So we're going to talk a little bit about this more in terms of, was it always that way, or is this riding on the popularity of the rosé invasion that came from Provence? But here you can see red grapes, but also white grapes too. And as we talk about the rosés here, I'm sure Sylvain will spend some time talking to us about the use of white wines in the making of rosés, which is very different. If you remember, if you were with us for Costilla de Nîmes a couple of weeks ago, where they essentially don't use any white wine in their red rosé blends because there's so little white wine to begin with. Here, it's obviously a bigger part. So you have 2 wines here. And one is, the first one will be the Fond Vert, and the second one will be the Verrerie. So please try them side by side. And what's interesting to me, perhaps more so than even than the whites, which is, I think, a very stark juxtaposition of wine styles, here you have 2 different wines representing 2 very different styles of what's going out there. So the first wine you have, which is the wine from, oops, sorry, move your slide, Evan, from Chateau Fond Vert, the La Restinque 2020, is Grenache Noir and Cinsault, again, bio and Demeter certified, and made from direct pressing, natural yeast, 4 months, boom, get it in the tank, get it on the market. And what's beautiful about this wine is it's just so delightfully fresh. It's so delightfully cherries and strawberries and flowers and real just lifted perfume, lifted aromatics. There's tangerine, there's Jolly Rancher candy or Starburst type like candy. It has this wonderful, almost intoxicatingly seductive character to it, and very bright, very easy to drink. One that you could probably see, the next thing you knew, you'd had a half dozen bottles with about 3 or 4 friends and chatting over an afternoon. But just very much an easy, quaffable wine, just a little bit off dry. There's a kiss of residual sweetness here, and very much a style of the modern style of rosé. So as we talk about this wine, Sylvain, maybe talk to us a little bit about, has it always been this way? Has there always been over 50% rosé made here? Has the percentages changed over time as rosé has become more popular and you are so close to Provence, and the role of white wine grapes in the rosés, and then obviously speak specifically to this delicious, easy drinking Chateau Fond Vert?
So you're right, Evan. From the beginning, the rosé were not the biggest wine produced in Luberon. Actually, it was something like 15 to 20%. We always made rosé in Luberon from the beginning, but it was a pretty small part of this, and it was pretty dark rosé and Venus rosé. You know, that kind of rosé, just a little bit much more like Tavel, for example, but with much more acidity. Thing is that we were just happy by the rosé fashion that became in 2005, 2006 And at this time, numbers just increase it just to go to something like 52%, even 58%, I think, last year.
Wow.
This year, we are getting a little bit more like what we would like to have, like an original and a regular proportion of production, which could be something like 45 to 50% of rosé, because our terroir goes naturally to rosé too. You know, we are on chalk soils with a lot of sandy soils, good altitude. We are not far from Côte de Provence, so we are kind of challengers of Provence, specifically in terms of prices, because normally you can find a lot of Luberon which are little Côte de Provence with lower prices, you know, and a little bit more freshness. The difference is that very often we have a little bit more acidity over there that they will have in over there, just because of chalk and altitude, as I told you. Second thing is about white in rosé. Actually, it's not white wine in the rosé. This is just forbidden. You know, as you know, you can't mix any wine just to make rosé. For example, you can't mix red wine and white wine just to obtain rosé, except in Champagne, where they can do this. But for the rest, this is not possible. The thing is that what we use is white grapes. This is what Provence, Côte de Provence do for many, many years, actually, you know. It's just like, because it's easier for you after this to obtain interesting color that the market is happy with, you know, with that very light, delightful pink, for example. And you can have a little bit more Grenache, and you can have a little bit more Syrah, even if you want in this, because you know that the white grapes will decrease a little bit this. And the thing is that white grapes in the rosé, it's also interesting because it gives you a little bit more roundness, you know. Very often red grapes, even when you use them to make a rosé, still are a little bit more strong, you know, a little tannins. Even when you make direct press, you know, it's still red grapes. And adding a little bit of white in this, just like adding a little bit of cream in your sauce, you know. It's something that you can, if you use it pretty interestingly, this is the same type of result. So we use more and more white grapes in the rosé, but what we expect now in the appellation is that we really have a very, very big explanation. No, I'm going to say espoir. Expectation, sorry, about white wines, because we really think that white is a real color of our place here. You know, we can make very, very interesting white wine. So we are trying to gain a little bit more white grapes that were used in rosé wine, just to go back to white wine.
Right.
Just
so the posture there, Sylvain, almost is sort of like Nîmes, because Nîmes has been doing that too. They make great white wine, but they don't make as much of it. So therefore, they would like to save the white grapes to make those delicious white wines, rather than using the white fruit simply as an add-in to the rosé style. Leave that to the Provencal.
The difference that in Nîmes, for example, they just do something like 5% of the appellation are white wines. So this is really very, very rare. For us, it's always something like 20%. The thing that we would want to gain, just to go to 25%. And we don't have to replant grapes for this. You know, the grapes are already there. We just have to say, okay, let's try to find a new way of winemaking in rosé, for example, which wouldn't have to use some white grapes. But the market right now, specifically in the US, is increasing a lot in white wines, and is pretty stable in regarding to rosé wine. So maybe this will help.
I hope so. I hope so too. Great. And interestingly, as I said before, the wine that we're having next to it is another take. And so this one from Château La Verrerie is I would say, I don't want to say this in a judgmental wine, but it seems to me to be a more serious wine in terms of being, again, more savory by nature. The color, interestingly enough, if you look at them side by side, they're both that sort of very light sort of salmony thing, but this wine's a little bit more pink. The first wine being a little bit more pale. And I don't know whether that's due to the Cinsault or whether, because they're both obviously Grenache driven. But this wine has just so much interesting other flavor going on. So whereas the first wine was so much more lifted, this wine has more savoriness to it. And what I think here is this more about less cherries and berries and stuff like that, more like red apple skin or strawberry rhubarb preserves or that. But then there's also this interesting non-fruit side. So there's like pink peppercorns and spiciness. There's licorice red vines. There's an earthiness to the wine. It's leaner. It's brighter by nature. The acid is balanced, not really shrill. And I think, although I wouldn't put it away as long as a developer's have, I do think it'll age for a few years nicely. And it really sends more of a have me with food message, once again, than the first wine, which is just delightful to drink. What can you tell us a little bit about Chateau Verrerie, what they're doing? Obviously, the Decour family, which purchased the wine, is really focused on quality and, again, biologics and things like that. But again, a very different wine, once again, showing the range across Luberon that rosé can be.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So La Verrerie is one of the oldest domains that you can find in Luberon. They have been there for now more than 40 years, and always wanted to make very, very interesting and very high quality wines. So trying to do this on each part of the wine and each color. So this means that they have a woman director. First name is Valentine, and it's very interesting to meet her because she's 35 years old and she's very, very punchy, and she knows what she wants, and what she wants is making better wine than all the other guys in the middle of the game, and this is what she very often is able to do. And I know that on the rosé, they are. It's a very interesting wine because it's a very good mix between what we could call technologic wine, which could be very, very well made, and a terroir wine with a different approach, with a longer aging, for example, with trying to work with not with aromatic yeast or that kind of stuff. This is why you don't have so much red fruit or fruit aromas or something like this, but something which is richer, a little bit much more aromas, different styles of aromas, not just like fruit and freshness. And that's interesting because, as you say, this is the kind of rosé that you can even taste after 1, 2, 3, even 4 years, and goes in a very, very interesting type of aromas and tasting. It's always pretty interesting to make that kind of tasting blind, because you even in a much better in a black glasses. You take this, so you don't know it's a rosé, and this is a real definition of what should be a rosé. When you put your nose on this, you are not really sure if it's a red, if it's a white, or if it's a rosé. Because you find all the definition of this wine, and that's very interesting on this.
Yeah, no, I think that's well taken. And it's interesting because while it's not as extreme as those wines, to your point, the Tavel style or the Claret style, even that you would find in Bordeaux. Nevertheless, it's different there and shows this whole other element of what's going on there. Now, we talked a little bit before we hit the reds, we talked a little bit about the terroir before. You mentioned that it was so unique there. And I was wondering if you could take a few minutes and speak to us as we hit the next couple of slides about the terroir of the Luberon.
Okay, so so you we also spoke a lot about altitude, but that means that we had a painting of Cézanne on the first page, of this presentation, and you could see the Montagne Sainte-Victoire. So if you ever been near Aix-en-Provence, something like this, you can see this iconic mountain, which is totally white, a chalk mountain like this. Luberon is the same, except that we had pines, on the rocks. You know, it's not just rocks. It's chalk, big chalks like this, and pines on this. And after this, we have three or four types of soils. You know, you can have what they call mucin sands, that we would say sandy soils, which are pretty light. Interesting because you can make very good rosé on this. You know, it's normally it's easy to work. It's you don't make big wines on this, but you make regular wines. And when the weather is not too dry, and hopefully in Luberon we are not so far from the sea, not so far from the Alps and everything. So very often storms are coming and visiting us during summer. So we are not running out of water. Sandy soils can be very interesting because you can have elegance, finesse, and a light style. After this, limestone scree. You will have a. I think that scree is a little stone like this. How could you define? Yeah.
Yeah, it's really sort of a subset, if you will, of colluvium. You know, it's like this interesting collection of loose sediments that sort of sit at the base of the hilltop.
Okay, I know. So pretty rich soils. Sometimes you can find a little bit of clay over there, but not the red clay, but the real brown clay. You know, the dark clay. So that's interesting because you will have more power on this, and you will have natural water reserve on this. So on this type of soils, you can choose which type of grapes you want to plant. You can choose which type of wine you want to obtain, because the full range is possible. You know, you don't have any problem with saying, oh no, this one will be too light just to have that type of wine. Over there, you can choose whatever you want. You've got a little part of this, not so much. So we've got sand, this part. Then you've got alluvial terrace. So that's interesting because we have the Durance River used to be not a river, but a flood. How do you say flood?
Yeah,
You say the same? Yeah. So it went to the sea, but I think maybe 5,000 years ago, something like this, we had a brook in the middle of this, and then the Durance didn't go to the sea again, but it went to the Rhône. And at this time, it just get down from 100 meters, and you have the new Durance now, but you had the old Durance bench. And on this, you can find same type of galets roulés that you can find in Châteauneuf, you know, coming from the Alps, from another part of the Alps, because it's not the same river that came from there. It came from another part, but you can find this on a specific place just all over the appellation. It's very small, but it's very interesting, specifically for red wines. And you can have much more type of garrigue wines that you can find in Côte-du-Rhône. These wines are really Rhodanian wines over there. And red clay and oak sands. That's very interesting because you may see, maybe you'll see a picture of this.
Yeah,
after
let's
this.
move to the next. I can see it right here.
Yeah, it's really totally red. You know, it's just like maybe you've seen picture of a very famous village we have in not far from Apt. The name is Roussillon, which is a red place, and we also have a place which is very interesting for when you are talking with American, that we call Colorado Provencal. You know, Provencal Colorado, because it's just red like this. It's just kind of little mountains and it really looks like Colorado, except that it's just maybe 20 or 30 hectares big, not as big as Grand Colorado, but it's the same type of soil. You know, that very red soil, which is red because it's full of iron, of course, but also because it's very poor soil. The soil is poor, but you've got a lot of clay in this, so you never miss water in this. So very often, strangely, the soil looks very simple. You know, you have no stones in this. It's just red like this. But when you put something in this, it goes very strong. So you can find a lot of this in the north of the appellation. And you can do all type of wine on this, but you can expect pretty strong wines over there.
Great. And then lastly, sort of to pull these together, and I love the specificity of the photos. They're showing you the different soil types. This is a little bit scary, at least for me to look at. But if you could explain perhaps a little bit of the context of what you were speaking of with respect to the soils, but also just sort of reiterating again within climate being not only just the soil, but the combination of rain, the sun, and all of that. How does this slide information all come together for us?
So the good things to know is that everything that you can see Cretaceous limestone, it's exactly just like I was talking to you about the Saint Victoire. These are places where you can't really put any vineyards on. You know, it's just like it's so strong. It's a real stone, a strong stone like this. It's not interesting for business. So this means that you've got the mountain like this. You can see it over there. You know, it's you just press like this, and the limestone goes at the top over there. So you've got the top of the mountain, and on both sides of this mountain, you had sedimentary possibilities that went. So you can see that you've got the yellow part, the marls, as you said, with the little stones like this. So you've got altitude over there, you've got clay, you've got a very interesting soil. So very often this is parts with wine with a high personality and good possibilities of making terroir premium wines. Then you've got the sandy soils, a little bit less altitude, less complex soils, but very easy to work and very interesting for rosé, for example, or for fresh white wines, because you can keep freshness in that type of soils, because you are able to make good yields in this vineyard. So, you know, when you say about good yields, you have lower maturation, lower alcohol degree, so bigger freshness in the wine. And on the other side, where you can find, this is where you would find the red soil that we saw before, you know, colluvial soil on the plain and clay sand soils with pebbly scree. So this part, when you go a little bit eastern, this is the part where you will find this incredible red soils staying over there.
Great, thank you. All right. So, lastly, before we taste our reds, I do think it's important to reiterate the growth of the sustainability, organic certification, and all that. And you know, we talked earlier. This is just a reiteration of the figure at the beginning that 19% today are certified organic, but it's important to look backwards and to look forward. So over the past 5 years, that's a 50% increase. So this is a very recent passion for moving this way. And again, by virtue of the diversity, by virtue of the nature of the climate, the situation not having as much rain and the rain being fairly predictable, if you will, allows you to produce organics and stuff like that. But today, the new estates, and you know, whether it's Ridley Scott, John Malkovich, or any new people who are going in there, they're very feeling very strong on going organic, and literally nearly 70% now of these sort of more private individual places are organic or are in conversion. So it's a really important thing. I think what's interesting moving forward as well as we approach next year is these two initiatives that are going on with Luberon. First of all, with the park itself, and working with an environmental charter to better preserve the landscape and encourage wine owners to be even greener and more virtuous, if you will, in their approaches to doing that. Not that they weren't that way before, but you know, pushing towards certification, pushing towards having that be standard operating procedure. And also, interestingly, here in an international thing, tipping ourselves outwards and understanding as part of global citizenry, if you will, that the Luberon folks are going to be initiating cooperative work specifically with Greece and with Italy on a project that looks at viticulture in the world of climate changes. Remember, we talked about before, being at high altitude is just a piece of that, but it also speaks to the importance that Luberon places on the holistic definition of sustainability, of which climate change plays a part. So bravo to everything that's going on in Luberon. So now we're going to talk about the reds, and the reds, like the whites, by law, need to be blended. And they're going to be classic blends of grapes that we're familiar with, primarily from both Rhône and the Provencal areas. And once again, just a reminder, first of all, that whites can actually be added, a small amount, into the reds, again, as grapes for preservation of freshness, presumably for fixation of pigmentation, as it's in other parts of the world, but different things too. But it really is all about red. And here, you have Grenache, and what Grenache brings to the table, Mourvèdre, Carignan Cinsault, etc. And we have two wines, again, differences in style. One being, I think, very Luberon, as I said before with Sylvain, he'll talk about his wine in a minute, very different approach, more elegant in style, the approach. And then you have the Canorgue, which, is so classically Rhodien, as you would have said earlier, Sylvain. Let's talk about that. So let's first speak to your wine. I'm not going to say a word because I have the luxury of you being here. Please tell us about this wine, what you're doing, and your amazing estate and its different parcels.
Okay, so first thing to know is that what is interesting in Luberon for reds, for me and for many people, is that it's an interesting place to make Syrah wines in the south part of Rhône Valley, which is pretty rare. Normally, it's always it's too warm or too dry. Here we are able to obtain very interesting wine with Syrah that we can age pretty long. And I just decided when I came there in 1995 to try to find 2 or 3 different terroirs that I could say that could be some parcellaire research. And first one was Le Clos, which is interesting because it was just the opposite of what I was expected about wine terroir in Rhône Valley. I used to drive to Châteauneuf or anything, so I just wanted to find a place with a lot of galets roulés, with a little vineyards in Goblet, just like Grenache 100%, very ripe and everything. And when I came there, I just had 1 hectare of vineyard of this old Syrah, and on this hectare, I was even not able to find 1 stone on this. It's just clay, soil, and undersoil. So it looks like Burgundy, but the down part of the Burgundy. But it's very fresh, and it's interesting because it's a east-northeast orientation. You've got a high altitude, and you've got old vineyards of Syrah, which are 50 years old right now, and that's pretty rare because they just came with the Syrah in the 1973, 1974. This is one of the first vineyards that were planted in Luberon with the Syrah. After this, I just said, okay, what kind of wine do we obtain with this? So because we need to have a blend, we just use it what we could find in this specific terroir, which were Syrah 50 years old right now, Grenache Noir, which were 65 years old, and a little bit of Mourvèdre, which were 80 years old. I don't know how they just arrived there. I don't know, but I just tried to keep them as long as possible. And 2017 was the last vintage where we could find this. We just grow organically. We just do anything by hand, and we pick by hand, of course. And then what I try to do in the cellar is that to be as simple as possible. 2017 was warm, but not a very early picking vintage for us. So we had to wait a little bit for rain to come, for Syrah to gain in juice and in juicy. And when it goes to the tank, I just decided not to make any grappe entière or wild bunch, but trying like I do sometimes to keep freshness also. But I said, okay, this is particular. I'm gonna distemp all the Syrah because I just tasted it like this. The stem was too strong for me, too vegetal, too green, too much greenness. But the stem of the Grenache Noir looks perfect. They were pretty yellow. They were very, very sweet and everything. So I just took the stem of the Grenache Noir and mixed them in the middle of the tank.
Oh,
and after this, we just do anything particularly. We make 1 pump probe every day, and that's all. Everything is in the grapes. It's very easy to make wine with Syrah and Grenache because you've got color, tannins, whatever you want. If you want to go down on this, you can obtain very, very big wines. But what I want to find over there is the real picture of this place. You know, it will never be Châteauneuf-du-Pape or Hermitage. You know, it's something very different. It's it's uh, it's a different picture. So you need to put the real picture in the middle of the frame. And my picture here is just okay. You've got a strength but finesse. You've got a color but not too much, and you've got balance. And try to find this is say okay. This wine needs a lot of time to go through this. So we just decided to make a not far from a 30 months aging, yeah, 28 months, yeah, with a combination with barrels, but no new oak barrels because one more time, I don't want to have any signature in the wine, and a lot of concrete tank. And after all this time, goes to bottle directly with no fining, no filtration, and that's it.
Yeah, it's a delicious wine, and the very first notes that I wrote here were elegant. You know, there is an elegance and a finesse to your point about this wine. The tannin management on it is lovely. Obviously, your care in making sure that the stems that you used from your Grenache were, lignifié completely and yellow and brown rather than green shows in the final product. Just the finesse of the tannins were there. The levels of layering or flavor are excellent, and whether consciously or unconsciously, as I said before, it comes off more Burgundian by nature, as opposed to the last wine we have here from Chateau Lacanau, their 2019, which you put it in your nose and it smells like Northern Rhone. I mean, the very first things I picked up here were meaty and peppery and charcuterie and pastrami and sort of very much of a Northern Rhone style, ample Rotondon, some pyrazines, sort of that classic Syrah driven sort of flavor. And even though there is Grenache in it and some old Vine Carignan, it really is the Syrah that dominates the style. And to your point, it's a delicious wine. But it would be interesting to get your flavor on, does this really, through the prism of two red wine glasses, express the diversity within the terroir that you find in Luberon, or is this simply interpretive in that the people at Canor, Jean-Pierre and Martine, are looking at making a style that might be more obvious, if you will, to the people that would be picking, oh, it's Rhone grapes, it should be a Rhone style. Whereas your wine is so different and clearly expresses, I think, your terroir and your place. Am I correct in that? What are your thoughts about this wine versus your wine?
There's something which is very important. I think when you are talking about wines coming from blends, from blending, just like I think that you blend the wine that you really love. It's interesting to see that if we are both on a table, Evan, and we have 10 different bottles and we have the same objective in the end, saying, okay, I need 60 hectoliters of Luberon red wine 2019. And this is, you've got 120 hectoliters, and you just have to pick what you want of this and what kind of thing you will like. And I just blend like a Burgundian just because I taste like a Burgundian, not because I work like a Burgundian. You can't really say that you make the same work here than I do in Burgundy, because now I'm also winemaker in Burgundy, so
right.
I can see the real difference on this. But the truth is that what is true is that I love a certain type of wine. I like finesse in the wine. I like the wine to be balanced, and I like the wine to be drinkable, very drinkable. For me, I will always go to a lighter wine if it's more fine, and it's not always the same. What is interesting with Jean-Pierre and Nathalie is his daughter is now working with him for the last maybe 5 or 6 years. It's a very old place, always been organic, and with a real Rhone style winemaking and tasting. So that's very good, because this is the real picture also of what you can create in Luberon. This is a typical picture of a red Luberon wine, which is always an award winner in many contests and everything. This is exactly what people accept from this. It's a little bit more like Northern Rhone. It's very balanced. It's a very appealing. It's very drinkable too, but on a very different type of personality.
Yeah. So
no aging on this wine.
No, go ahead.
The wine goes directly on the market, and maybe you could find that kind of wine with my label on it, called Malacca, which is now 19 also on the market, and it's a little bit more like this. It's a lighter soils, and it's easier aging, 18 months, not more, and you go a little bit more in that kind of personality.
Yes,
and
it's the wine is more I don't, sometimes you have French words that don't necessarily translate to English, but it's more costaud, it's just got that bigger, more punch to it and all that. But it's interesting that you say that we're sitting around at your table, and it is as much about intent, right, as what you want to do, as much as that. So you're starting with quality fruit, regardless of its appellation, but your style, your approach, your interpretation is as much going to determine your selection of which Syrah you use versus whatever, versus not. And I think what's wonderful to finish here is to show, the range, the polarity between these two different wines is perhaps the greatest of the pairs here. But interestingly, for me, having tasted these wines and a few other Luberon wines, it's interesting that the first wine we had, the Terre de Safre, and 6 are probably more of the expectation of what everybody has, yet in the middle, we've shown the different faces of everything Luberon can actually do. So again, I thank you, and I thank Daphne and Eileen for giving us such an incredible selection of wines to tell the story there. So we have just a couple of minutes for questions. If anybody has something out there, I don't see anything populated in the Q&A box. But if anybody out there, Li-Meng, I don't know if you want to bring people on or simply give them audio or whatever. If there are any questions, be happy to do that. I know Sylvain's done an amazing job in sort of telling the story, and I'm also sensitive to people's time. But if anybody does have something they would like to throw out, a preference on a wine they had, I know we would love to hear. Don't know.
I think, Evan, we have Q&A already answered by Daphne. So thank you to everybody who's here. I don't think we're going to do the camera on, but it's great to have everyone here.
Yeah, and if there are any last minute questions, I know we're running up against the appointed hour. I'm always sensitive and respectful of people's time. I also think Sylvain probably wants to go have dinner too. But if anybody does have a last minute question, if nothing else, I do hope that you will walk out of here, whether in person or if you're watching this as a webinar afterwards and trying the wines there because of timing. Again, the beauty of having this particular technology today is it does allow us to be able to share it later, or you can go back and watch it later afterwards if you want to revisit things after tasting the wines. We can do that. But on behalf of Sylvain, on behalf of Luberon, Anteron, etc. What a treat to get this lovely, immersive, and beautiful depiction of visuals, of glasses, of wines, of local expertise and opinion, of an area that probably, compared to many areas of the Rhone, we know less about. So I'm grateful for that. Any final comments, Li-Meng, Daphne, Sylvain, anything you'd like to add before we finish up?
Well, as you can see, this is exactly what this picture is great to finish, because this is exactly a very good summary of the Luberon place. You've got the mountain down over there, so it's really a mountain. It's more than 1,000 meter high, and then you've got all this nature everywhere and vineyards in the middle. Very sunny sky and everything. So hopefully we'll be able to see you very soon in the place. So we will be happy to have a guest over there very soon. So yeah, I can just say, if you ever find any bottle of Luberon on the market, try it. The thing that you will never really know what type of wine you will obtain. As you see, the range is very large. So try to find a lot of information on the back label, but you will be able to find very different type of wine, which is always very fun.
Yeah, and I think if you were paying attention out there in Zoom land to the pricing versus the value of what you're getting here, Luberon wines, as they would say in the boxing trade, punch above their weight. They're always delivering on the premise, and in increasing time of challenges in the market, supply chains, prices going up, availability. It's nice to find wines that really can deliver, between $13 and $30 and do so beautifully there. So once again, thank you everybody for your time. We will be in touch. We will be sharing PDF of the presentation as well as the webinar itself soon, and we will be in touch soon. Once again, thank you so much for your time. Sylvain, thank you so much for your time and expertise. And we will speak soon.
Cheers.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody.